The Bond of Stars. The message that would change the course of galactic history arrived on a Tuesday morning at Terra Command. Admiral Jessica Harper was halfway through her morning coffee when the quantum communicator erupted with a signal that made her blood run cold. It wasn't the official channels from the Hegemony Council that concerned her. It was the emergency beacon from Zephyr Prime, transmitted through a dying planet's last functional relay. Commander David Park rushed into her office without knocking, his face pale beneath his dark skin. The Zephyrians are under attack. It's not a raid, Admiral. It's an extermination. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For 5 years, the Zephyrians had been humanity's closest allies in a galaxy that viewed the newcomers from Earth with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. The relationship between humans and Zephyrians had begun with curiosity rather than conflict. When humanity's first deep space exploration vessel, the Horizon, encountered a Zephyrian science ship near the Tau Ceti system, neither species immediately reached for weapons. The Zephyrians, with their elongated bodies covered in iridescent feathers that shifted color with their emotions, had approached with caution but genuine interest. They were scholars and artists, a species that valued knowledge and beauty above conquest. The first human to speak with a Zephyrian was Lieutenant Maria Santos, the Horizon's communications officer. She still remembered how Ambassador Timelex had tilted his crested head, his forearms moving in what she later learned was a gesture of greeting. "You are new to the void between stars," Timelex had said through the translator, his feathers shifting to soft blue hues of welcome. "We would know your stories." That simple exchange had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. Within 2 years, human and Zephyrian scientists were working together on joint research stations. Zephyrian artists were exhibiting on Earth while human musicians performed in the crystal amphitheaters of Zephyr Prime. The cultural exchange program had produced technological advances neither species could have achieved alone. Zephyrian biological computers enhanced with human quantum processing created medical breakthroughs that saved millions of lives across both worlds. The Hegemony Council had watched this partnership with growing alarm. For 10,000 years, they had maintained order through strict hierarchies. The Dominari, a species of silicon-based beings who communicated through electromagnetic pulses, controlled the Council's military might. The Korvax Collective, a hive mind that spread across 17 systems, managed commerce and trade. The Etherian Watchers, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, claimed spiritual authority over lesser species. These 3 powers had ruled through a simple principle that new species must earn their place through centuries of servitude before gaining even limited rights. Humanity's rapid advancement, coupled with their partnership with the Zephyrians, threatened this ancient order. The Council had issued warnings, imposed trade restrictions, and attempted diplomatic isolation. Neither humans nor Zephyrians had yielded. Admiral Harper pulled up the tactical display showing Zephyr Prime. The planet was surrounded by Dominari battlecruisers, their geometric forms bristling with weapons that violated 3 separate treaties. She watched in real time as orbital bombardment platforms materialized from hyperspace, positioning themselves above the Zephyrian cities. This wasn't just an attack. It was a statement. "Get me a direct line to President Chen," Harper ordered, "and mobilize the 7th Fleet." Commander Park hesitated for only a moment. "Admiral, the Council has declared this an internal matter. Any interference could be considered an act of war." Harper turned to face him, her gray eyes hard as steel. "Commander, 5 years ago, the Zephyrians sheltered our colony ship when it was damaged by pirates. They shared their food when our hydroponics failed. They taught our children their language and invited us into their homes. If we abandon them now, we don't deserve the stars." The footage from Zephyr Prime began arriving an hour later, transmitted by brave Zephyrian journalists who continued, broadcasting even as their world burned. The crystal cities that had stood for millennia were being systematically destroyed. The great library of collective memory, containing the recorded experiences of every Zephyrian who had ever lived, was reduced to molten glass in minutes. The gardens of harmony, where different species had learned to understand each other through shared cultivation, became ash carried on radioactive winds. But it was the images of Zephyrian families that broke humanity's heart. Parents wrapping their wings around their young, their feathers blazing bright orange with defiance even as plasma bombs fell. Elder Zephyrians standing in front of schools and hospitals using their own bodies as shields, children singing the songs of their ancestors as the sky burned above them. Captain Rachel Morrison of the cargo vessel Mercury's Dream was one of the few human ships in Zephyrian space when the attack began. Against all protocols, she diverted her ship to the planet's surface. Her crew managed to evacuate 300 Zephyrian children before Dominari fighters forced them to flee. Her final transmission to Earth was simple and direct. They're killing everyone, not just military targets. Everyone. The Council wants to erase them completely. The emergency session of Earth's global parliament convened within 6 hours. Representatives from every nation, colony, and orbital habitat participated. The debate was fierce but brief. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting among itself, but faced with genocide of their friends, they spoke with one voice. President Chen addressed the galaxy from the steps of the United Earth building. Her words were broadcast on every frequency, ensuring even the Hegemony Council would hear them. The Zephyrians welcomed us when others feared us. They shared their knowledge when others would have us remain ignorant. They called us friends when others saw only servants. Today, the Hegemony Council has shown its true nature. It rules not through wisdom, but through terror. It maintains order not through justice, but through genocide. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. Humanity has seen genocide before. We have been both its victims and its perpetrators. We carry that shame and that knowledge in our collective memory. We swore never again. That oath extends beyond our own species. The massacre of the Zephyrians will not stand. We call upon all free species to join us in defending those who cannot defend themselves. The Council's response was swift and dismissive. High Executor Dominax appeared on all official channels, his crystalline form pulsing with authority. The humans are young and do not understand the burden of maintaining galactic order. The Zephyrians were warned about the consequences of disrupting established protocols. Their fate serves as education for all species that would challenge the natural hierarchy. Humanity would be wise to learn from this example rather than share in it. But humanity had already made its choice. In shipyards hidden throughout the solar system, vessels that had been secretly constructed over the past 5 years powered up their engines. The Hegemony Council had always assumed humanity's fleet was limited to the 50 ships they had registered. They never imagined that a species barely decades into space travel could have built 10 times that number in secret. The Zephyrian refugee ship Gentle Wing limped into Earth's orbit 3 days after the attack began. Of the 100,000 Zephyrians who had attempted to flee their dying world, only 8,000 had survived the Council's hunter-killer squadrons. Among them was Timalex, the ambassador who had first greeted humanity. His feathers, once brilliant and ever-changing, were now dull gray with grief. Admiral Harper met him personally as he disembarked. The old Zephyrian's 4 arms hung limp at his sides. His voice, once musical, was hollow with loss. They destroyed everything. Our history, our culture, our children. Why? Because we dared to treat you as equals? Because we shared knowledge freely? Because we believed the galaxy could be better than fear and servitude? Harper placed her hand gently on one of his arms, a gesture of comfort she had learned from Zephyrian customs. We will remember, she promised, and we will ensure the galaxy never forgets what happened here. The Council believes might makes right. They're about to learn that humanity has its own interpretation of that philosophy. Across Earth's colonies, recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Engineers worked round-the-clock shifts to prepare ships for war. Scientists shared every piece of military technology they had developed, including some the Council had specifically forbidden. The ember of human rage kindled by the footage from Zephyr Prime had become an inferno. The Council had expected humanity to cower at their display of power. Instead, they had awakened something that had slumbered since humanity's last great war. The species that had once nearly destroyed itself with atomic fire, that had fought brutal wars over ideology and resources, that had learned the terrible cost of hatred and overcome it, was now united in purpose. The Zephyrians would be avenged. The Council would answer for their crimes. And the galaxy would learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their capacity to stand for others when standing was dangerous, to fight for justice when injustice was law, and to remember that friendship was worth more than safety. The Reckoning, the Hegemony Council's first indication that they had miscalculated, came exactly 30 days after the destruction of Zephyr Prime. Monitoring stations across 3 sectors simultaneously reported massive gravitational anomalies. Before they could investigate, 500 human vessels dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. This wasn't the ragtag fleet of converted cargo ships the Council had expected. These were purpose-built warships, sleek and deadly, incorporating technologies the Council didn't know humanity possessed. Admiral Harper stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching the tactical display populate with enemy positions. Around her, the combined human fleet spread out like an iron net across space. She opened a channel to all ships. Today we show the galaxy that genocide has consequences. We fight not for conquest but for justice. We fight for those who can, no longer fight for themselves. Remember the Zephyrians. The response from every ship was immediate and unified. Remember the Zephyrians. The words became humanity's battle cry, spoken in a dozen languages but carrying one meaning. The friends who had been murdered would not be forgotten. The Council's response was predictable. High Executor Dominax himself appeared via hologram on the bridge, his form crackling with indignation. You dare challenge the established order of 10 millennia? Your species has existed in space for mere moments. You will be crushed like insects, and your world will share Zephyr Prime's fate. Harper's smile was cold as the void between stars. High Executor, you made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed we would fight like you do with massive ships and overwhelming firepower. But humans have been perfecting war for thousands of years. We learned long ago that the mightiest fortress can fall to the smallest weakness. Even as she spoke, humanity's true strategy was already in motion. While the visible fleet drew the Council's attention, smaller teams had been at work for weeks. Commander Park led a strike team that had infiltrated the Korvax Collective's central trading hub. Using computer viruses developed from Zephyrian biological computing principles, they introduced chaos into the Collective's hive mind. For the first time in its existence, the Korvax experienced individuality, as different segments of its consciousness were isolated from each other. The economic consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Trade routes collapsed as the Korvax struggled to coordinate its merchant fleets. Supply lines that had functioned for centuries suddenly failed. Worlds dependent on Korvax shipping found themselves cut off from essential resources. The Council's economic foundation crumbled in hours. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison, promoted after her heroic rescue efforts at Zephyr Prime, led a different kind of assault. Her squadron of stealth ships had been visiting the forgotten species, those deemed too primitive or worthless for the Council to properly monitor. The Yathi, a fungoid species that communicated through spores, had been laboring in Council mines for 300 years. The Terrellians, aquatic beings from a water world, had seen their oceans harvested to near destruction. The Mokari, silicon-based life forms related to the Dominari but considered inferior, had been relegated to maintaining the Council's waste processing facilities. To each of these species, Morrison brought the same message and the same gift. The message was simple: that the Council's rule was ending, and they could either remain slaves or become free. The gift was weapons, specifically designed for each species' unique physiology, along with the training to use them. The rebellions began simultaneously across 50 worlds. The Dominari military, superior in technology and numbers, found itself fighting on 100 fronts. Mokari workers sabotaged the very ships they maintained. Yathi released toxic spores in Council government buildings. Terrellians used their control of water processing facilities to cut off supplies to Council loyalists. Every species that had been oppressed for centuries rose up at once, coordinated by human tactical advisors who had spent weeks preparing them for this moment. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected source. The surviving Zephyrians, working with human scientists, had made a discovery in the weeks following their rescue. The Etherian Watchers, the energy beings who claimed spiritual authority over the galaxy, were not the evolved higher consciousness they pretended to be. They were parasites, feeding on the psychic energy of other species through their imposed religious ceremonies. The Zephyrians' biological computers, enhanced with human quantum processing, could generate a frequency that disrupted the Etherians' ability to maintain their crystalline shells. When this frequency was broadcast across the galaxy, the Etherian Watchers began to dissolve, their energy forms dissipating into space. Their screams, transmitted on all frequencies, revealed them for what they truly were. Not wise guides, but predators who had been feeding on the galaxy's fear and submission for millennia. The revelation shattered the Council's claim to moral authority. The Battle of the Void Gates became the turning point of the war. The Council had concentrated its remaining loyal forces at the hyperspace junction that connected the core worlds to the outer systems. If they could hold this position, they could prevent humanity and its allies from reaching the Council's seat of power. The Dominari fleet that assembled there was the largest military force in recorded history. Over 3,000 vessels armed with weapons that could crack moons. Admiral Harper knew that a direct assault would be suicide. Instead, she employed a tactic as old as human warfare itself. She made the enemy come to her. The human fleet took position at the edge of the system and waited. When scouts reported this to High Executor Dominax, he saw it as cowardice and ordered an immediate attack to crush the human upstarts once and for all. The Dominari fleet advanced in their traditional formation, a massive wall of firepower that had never been defeated. They were halfway across the system when Harper gave the order. Hundreds of small, unmanned vessels that had been hidden among the debris of the system's asteroid belt suddenly activated. Each one carried a simple payload, not weapons, but mining charges, the kind humans had used to break apart asteroids for resources. The charges detonated simultaneously, not targeting the Dominari ships, but the asteroids themselves. Millions of tons of rock and metal were hurled into carefully calculated trajectories. The Dominari fleet, built for ship-to-ship combat, was not prepared for what essentially amounted to an artificial meteor storm. Shields designed to stop energy. Weapons were overwhelmed by simple kinetic impacts. Ships worth fortunes were disabled by rocks that cost nothing. In the chaos, the human fleet struck with surgical precision. They didn't try to destroy the entire Dominari force. Instead, they targeted command ships and communication nodes. Within an hour, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy had been reduced to scattered groups of ships unable to coordinate with each other. The mighty Dominari armada fled in disorder, leaving the path to the core worlds open. The liberation of the survivor camps on the former Zephyr Prime was broadcast across the galaxy. Human medical teams, working alongside volunteers from a dozen species, rescued 20,000 Zephyrians who had been kept alive for experimentation and slave labor. The images of Zephyrian children reunited with parents they thought dead, of humans and aliens working together to heal the wounded, of former enemies now united in common cause, spread faster than the Council could suppress them. The final blow to the Hegemony Council came not from military defeat but from internal collapse. The Korvax Collective, its hive mind permanently fragmented, split into thousands of individual entities, each claiming sovereignty over different trade routes. The Dominari military, shamed by their defeat at the Void Gates, experienced a crisis of leadership as younger officers challenged the old guard who had led them to disaster. With the Etherian Watchers exposed and dispersed, the spiritual foundation of the Council's authority evaporated. High Executor Dominax made one last attempt to salvage his empire. He appeared before the Galactic Assembly, demanding that all species unite against the human threat. Instead, he faced a room full of representatives from species that had been silent for centuries. One by one, they stood and turned their backs on him, an ancient gesture of rejection that had not been seen in the Assembly for 5,000 years. Ambassador Timelek, speaking for the Zephyrian survivors, delivered the final statement. The Hegemony Council ruled through fear, maintained order through oppression, and enforced peace through genocide. Today, that age ends. We do not seek vengeance, but justice. We do not desire dominance, but equality. Let this be the beginning of a new age, where species are judged not by their age or power, but by their actions and intentions. The new galactic order that emerged was not perfect, but it was built on different principles. The Alliance of Free Worlds, as it came to be known, operated on consensus rather than hierarchy. Disputes were resolved through mediation rather than force. Knowledge was shared freely rather than hoarded as power. The Zephyrians, though reduced in number, became the keepers of this new order's moral center, their survival a reminder of both the cost of tyranny and the power of standing against it. Admiral Harper retired shortly after the war's end, but not before she stood with Ambassador Timalex at the memorial erected on Earth for the fallen Zephyrians. The monument, a crystal spire that sang in the wind, bore a simple inscription in both human and Zephyrian languages. They welcomed us to the stars. We brought them justice among them. Together we brought freedom. The galaxy had learned a powerful lesson about humanity. They were not conquerors seeking empire or zealots imposing ideology. They were something far more dangerous to tyranny. They were beings who remembered their friends, who stood for justice even when it cost them, and who proved that the youngest species could teach the oldest powers that might without righteousness was not might at all. It was merely violence, and violence, as humanity had learned through its own bitter history, ultimately consumed those who worshipped it. In the years that followed, human ships became known throughout the galaxy, not as harbingers of war, but as symbols of hope. When species faced oppression, when genocide threatened, when the powerful preyed upon the weak, the call would go out, and humanity would answer. They had earned their place among the stars not through conquest, but through compassion, not through power but through principle, and in every human ship, in every human settlement, the memory of the Zephyrians lived on, their songs still sung, their wisdom still shared, their friendship still honored. The galaxy was vast, and there would be other challenges, other tyrants, other threats to peace and justice. But now the oppressed knew they were not alone. Humanity had proven that standing for others was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And somewhere in the void between stars, in the quantum frequencies that connected all things, the spirits of the fallen Zephyrians sang a new song, a song of friendship that transcended death, of justice that overcame oppression, and of a small blue planet whose children had grown up to become the guardians their friends had always believed they could be.